that mic. I was expecting some sort of music and slow countdown and kind of serenade us into this moment. But yeah, thank you for that, Mike. Well, welcome everyone. Good to have you join us. Thank you. I know previously there's been people that have joined from all over the world in some amazing parts. We've shifted the time just very slightly on this one, pushed it back by an hour. So I hope that's been okay, and it includes some of our kind of US clients as well. So we just wanted to make it as inclusive as possible. So thank you for adjusting that, and welcome, of course, those that join us on the YouTube channel and kind of those that are watching the recording as well. Really good to see you. I know there's a lot of views that go through the non-live version of this. But my name's Anthony. I'm head of strategic partnerships, as it says on the screen there. So welcome. Today we've got a really interesting topic, so I'm really looking forward to this one. And Kerry, I haven't done this one for a while, but I've definitely not done one with you. This is awesome.
Hello. So I'm Kerry Wallace. I'm the client and commercial lead here, looking after client and customer experience. I joined Bailey and French in April, so this is my first live with everyone. I've been taking that time between April and now to meet with our clients, experience what we do, both through watching good design and facilitation, but also getting involved in some of the materials that we actually produce within my own team to get to know them well and really understand how we're working with our clients and supporting them. So it's good to join today, and hopefully we can have a great discussion.
Yeah, and this is kind of how the topic came about, wasn't it? Because we were kind of catching you up on what have we been talking about, what's been going on, what's the kind of Bailey and French lens of looking at some of these challenges. You know, there's a lot of human capital reports and workplace trend reports that are out there, but what's the kind of Bailey and French positive psychology, positive organizational psychology? So we're having a good discussion about that anyway. And we thought, well, that's a great, perfect topic for a live. So here we are. And actually there will be, as part of this recording, you'll be able to access this on our LinkedIn page, but also on our website. There is a blog that accompanies this just so that you can access the written version if you would like. But thanks for joining, Kerry. It's a really interesting one to go through, isn't it? It was interesting going through it.
Yes, yeah, in us kind of thinking about how we were looking at what was relevant today in Bailey and French world, but also where I've come from in terms of digital technologies, where those crossovers and synergies are happening. So yeah, it's been interesting to look at where the common trends are and what our HR partners and L&D partners are really grappling with at the moment.
Yeah, and there is a lot. So one of our biggest challenges actually, where we looked at some of this content was, well, what are we going to focus on? Because we've got half an hour, 45 minutes, and it seems like a long time, but it really isn't. When you think of all of the uncertainty, all of the global changes that are happening across, we work across police departments, across the UK civil service, we work across the US, a lot of Europe. There's a lot of different clients, a lot of nuances to a lot of these trends that probably we won't get time to really delve into, but we really welcome your questions, because I'm sure there will be some nuances of some of the themes that we're talking about here. We're going to probably stick to high level trends, but if you've got some questions based on your organization and what you would do, or scenarios that you want us to cover, let's throw some at us and see how we cope. But one of the kind of, I guess, overarching themes for us that we really were talking about was this really interesting point that and I think it's a recent Deloitte report that says 87% of people say that they are effective in work right now, and yet 12% of execs think the same thing, which shows this really interesting disconnect in, and I wouldn't even call it conflict, actually. I would just maybe call it uncertainty, maybe a lack of clarity. And the Bailey and French approach is, let's not assume people are bad. Let's not assume people are lazy. Let's not assume the negative. The negativity bias has a tendency to creep into all aspects of work and home life. Absolutely, right? That's human nature. It's a bias. But how can we maybe not do that? And actually having that lens of what we've been talking about. So we're going to cover things like, we were talking about the year of teams. What has changed, right? We've been talking about skills-based organizations. but how are we maybe putting a Bailey and French slant on that? Maybe we just start with the year of teams and we go from there. Kerry, what do you think?
Yeah, let's. Yeah. So in terms of that, I mean, we've kind of talked about, and I think that's what we were discussing in terms of leaders asking their teams to sort of pick up and work collaboratively together. They're asking their teams to kind of take more responsibility, perhaps, whilst they're looking at the transformation and change that may be happening in their businesses. And I think what we found talking to our clients, and certainly where we're seeing successes, is teams that are being effective are those that can work together collaboratively, know each other's strengths, and can play on that. So actually finding a way to connect, even if you're in a hybrid situation, you've got a workforce that are either remote or in office or mixed, just being able to pull on each other's strengths and know what skills you've got. So, you know, you're able to take responsibility for your own tasks, but also know what the bigger picture is.
Yeah. And it's really interesting because I think we've been talking, and I've seen a lot of clients that are talking about communication, collaboration, removing silo. That's not new, that's been going on for a while. Maybe how they're doing it is slightly different, but I haven't seen it as much as what I was anticipating, or maybe what we had been thinking about. I think we were expecting a little bit more of an emphasis on the team this year, because leaders, there was already signs, and we're definitely getting signs now that leaders are stressed, leaders are burnt out and can't take responsibility of the well-being and performance of everyone in their team. I know to a certain degree that is their responsibility, but we were trying to emphasize the onus on teams.
Yes, I mean, in terms of being a line manager and understanding your team's strengths is one thing. Perhaps how you open up those conversations and talk to them about how to work more effectively, how to work smarter, and giving that empowerment to your team to actually know that they can reach out to their colleagues and work together on a problem. So you need to sort of ensure that you're equipping your team to be able to make those decisions and move forward and actually support the manager in the overall objective of, you know, whether that's increasing sales, improving customer service, down to production lines, you know, across all sorts of different sectors. I think the way that Bailey and French are looking at this through a positive lens and making those strength-based conversations work within teams and line managers, giving that authority or that empowerment to people to be able to talk to each other. I think that connection is really important and will continue to be so over the next couple of years. I suppose in terms of us thinking about how larger companies may be going through restructure and looking at change as a whole, how we kind of bring those skills to the fore and really start to focus in on people's strengths is something that we've talked about quite a lot. Just seeing something come in.
Yeah, good question, Alex. In terms of are people role modeling this for that within their teams? Are people kind of really taking ownership of these types of behaviors? And you're right, Kerry, there's a lot to it. You know, are people kind of setting goals and helping each other to set goals? Are we keeping each other motivated when we're not feeling great? You know, what is the role of each other? And whether you're hybrid, probably even actually more important when you're hybrid, because you don't see the nuances of the person sat next to you with maybe a slightly different mood or what have you. And we know that loneliness can be a problem, right? So loneliness to me is almost an indicator that no, people are not role modeling this. And no, there's still probably a lot for organizations to do this year to ramp up the year of teams, right? To make sure that the team is a little bit more connected. And therefore the role of the leader, I think, changes a little bit into not taking responsibility to do all of this themselves, but how can they connect the people in the team? And we talk, obviously, as part of our human leadership program, the importance of building human connectors, not just connections within these teams. And it's a really interesting one that I just haven't heard people talk enough about, I don't think, this year.
I think again, when we were talking about especially when I arrived and I wanted to see how the skills-based organisations or where transformation has happened and people have moved to skills-based curation of all of their learning and development, talking about, instead of rating competencies on performance reviews, starting to bring in those skills and those strengths. I think what the managers, or what we're trying to help our clients with, if they've got a challenge in terms of, let's take performance motivation and reviews as an example, enabling managers to be able to talk to their direct reports and have better conversations with them, so those individuals can find their strengths and start to understand how they fit into not only the team but the overall objective of their work, and therefore be able to thrive. I think where we can help, where we have been helping, is really letting them come to a conversation and be able to open up and have those conversation starters, and for it to become more natural, so you've got that connection with your reports, and give that space for them to talk and for you to listen. I don't know if you've seen that in some of the work that you've been also looking at, and
yeah, definitely. And we were talking, weren't we, about, because your experience around the skills-based organizations is really interesting, because then you layer in the strengths piece and it becomes incredibly powerful when you combine the two.
yes.
And we were talking a little bit about what are the really simple guides, and not even toolkits and things, because I think KPMG actually just did a review on this, saying that people within 5 minutes can pretty much access any learning that they want. Right, the organisations are doing a pretty good job of even curating content in the way that you were just describing. There's a bit of e-learning, there's a bit of that.
Yeah.
Actually, just stripping all of that back and helping them do the really important one or two things in that meeting, or like almost identifying what are the key moments that matter in your week or your day, and then helping them. And we were talking, and there is a live on this, so if you haven't seen the one around skills-based organizations, I would encourage you to go back and check into the YouTube account, because it's a really interesting conversation. But layering in that we've got the strengths piece there, we've got the skills piece there, how do we make that as simple as possible? Because people have access to all of this stuff, but it's the simple stuff, it's the simple conversations in those moments that matter, that are most important.
And that's where that unification comes from, feeling that you are part of a team, and that your manager and your supporting network actually can understand and empathize with perhaps what's going on at work, how you then approach your tasks, and how you write your goals, how you start conversations with your manager, how you come to your manager to say, I'm currently underutilizing this strength. Where can I go? How can I improve a process, or add value to the work that we're doing by being more of this and less of this, or moving the needle on a strength, and being able to find opportunities to develop that, so you are really learning to love your work and thrive at work. I think that's one thing that has been come out. It's really sort of, I'm finding it hard and difficult to package it, because it's one of those things that I feel that we hear managers or through performance reviews, they're the difficult conversations, they're the conversation starters. Like, where does the thread of teasing that out someone else starts, and what kind of questions could I be asking to open up that dialogue? So I think in terms of being able to identify your own strengths as a leader, but also the strengths of your team, and talking about it regularly, makes those conversations a lot easier to get started, because then you find that you're in a flow, and in that sense you'll be more open to expressing how you feel, talking about the challenges that you're having, and sharing that amongst your peer group. yeah, that's where I think, in terms of being able to motivate from people that are doing a really good job, how do we move you from better to best? How do we help you encourage your own personal development? Because you do have a wealth of digital blended programs, L&D programs that you can tap into and do some self-directed learning, but being able to share that with your manager and have those engaging conversations with them helps you with a more rounded role at work and a sense of purpose.
Yeah, and it's really interesting, isn't it? Because I don't know an organization out there that isn't moving towards a slightly more hybrid, more flexible, kind of boundaryless, depending on the report that you're reading. A little bit more fluid, maybe portfolio career driven. It's a little bit more important, I think, that you're not just leaning on the skills, and people are really engaging on this. Well, yeah, you're good at it because you've built loads of skill over it and you've watched lots of videos and engaged, and you've kind of had to as part of your role. But does it light you up? Is it aligned to your personal ambitions and where you want to be in 5 years? But also maybe not having the leader, again, coming back to the team, like how are the team having that conversation together and kind of enhancing that collaboration that you were talking about right back at the beginning? I think it's all quite linked. Right, but with the strengths at the core. Because my worry would be if we don't do that, and I guess this comes into kind of future stuff of what we're probably going to be seeing. My worry is if we don't do that, we're going to end up with a lot of people who are on portfolio careers based on things that they're good at but that they don't enjoy, which was already kind of the pattern, because people would kind of build a career and then you'd kind of stick with it because you're on the career ladder. I think there's a real opportunity of creating really flexible model of work that will boost well-being as much as it will boost organizational performance. But if we don't include this strengths piece, I think we're just going to go back to where we were and have all the same problems all over again.
Yeah, because if you're known for being a project manager, you end up sticking at that, but you might have other skills within or other strengths and that bring you greater joy, but you just don't get the opportunity to perhaps find those opportunities within your company because you're known as the organized one. That's that's the bit you do, that's the part you play. So I suppose that's equipping people with knowing about their skills, but then building on where those strengths are and where those strengths lie, and where can I craft my role where I am at the moment. What opportunities does a wider organisation deliver to me, and how do I network? How do I engage with others? And that comes down to having conversations with people. If you're known for having one skill, you need to be shouting from the rooftops the other skills and strengths that you enjoy. So that can plant the seed and open up all sorts of different avenues. And I think I've found joining here, it's been really great to be able to talk to colleagues, not only just on a hi, how are you, and getting to know people as they've just joined, but also understand their strengths and how how the team collaborate together to meet the client's needs and to be able to give good customer service and make sure that the people that are working with us see us as flexible and engaged, but everybody can have a part to play in that outside perhaps their job description or their job title, I should say.
Yeah, and I guess, and we'll talk on this in a minute, but there is a lot of research that's coming out about people's engagement at work, and actually there's some interesting findings. But before we do that, just to wrap up kind of what have we been talking about? So the year of teams and kind of not putting the ownership on just the leader, because it's not really working. If anything, it's having a burnout effect, and people are struggling then, leaders are struggling as a result. Also looking at skills-based organizations and making sure that you're aligning strengths as a core part of that strategy. The other kind of key theme that we've been really talking about, and again, if you haven't seen some of this content, really encourage you to go back onto our LinkedIn or YouTube. You can find it on both actually, but around psychological flexibility, right? Because if we're moving to these more hybrid models, if we're looking at teams and a bit of a blurred level of responsibility between teams and leaders, you need to be quite comfortable with change and quite adaptable. And also one that maybe I'm not hearing people talk about enough, but that the whole element of self-esteem. You need to feel like you're confident and that you've got the skills to be able to flex into these different different kind of niche roles that you're trying to play and deal with the complexity. What are your thoughts on the psychological flexibility side of things?
It's actually been really interesting coming into Bailey and French and seeing that such at the forefront. The fact that we do look at flexibility and being able to not only be resilient, but look at how humans view change and what sort of mindset helps you overcome your daily challenges, but also gives you that inclusive environment to talk to your peers and who you're working with, and peer-to-peer across companies. Just having that network of support where there's change, just having the opportunity to be able to talk quite openly with people. I think building that within a company is so important, and it allows you to learn and grow and understand the meaning behind your role at work and outside of work. Being able to share those challenges and fears, I think has for me is just so important in what we do here, and how perhaps some of our clients are struggling with being able to pinpoint the exact need, but it comes down to that flexibility and adaptability in teams and that openness that you need to feel safe and included in your organization and know that your voice is being heard. We're so much more than just our work personas. All of us have our own lives to lead and those challenges outside which are unseen perhaps by when you step into your work mode. Everything else has to be left at the door, and I think the way that we approach that here is much more open and inclusive. So yeah,
there's definitely that human side of the flexibility that actually let's look at you as a whole person. Let's look holistically. Where do you fit into this system and this team, and what is driving you, what isn't? How are you gonna keep yourself? Because again, the responsibility of the person to come to work, to fulfill a contract, to take responsibility for their own well-being and take responsibility for their performance. People are finding that balance really tricky. And again, I know this is something we talked about before, but at what point do you kind of say, look, we're giving you this role, this job, this project, you need to step into it. We're going to provide you with resources, the environment, support from your team, but you have to lean into it, be proactive. But let's look at you as a holistic human being. What's going to be realistic for you? And let's have these. And again, it comes back to your point, and it's really interesting hearing your perspective. Actually, coming back into the Bailey and French fold, having been in learning, but then what does Bailey and French look at very differently? How can we help people just nudge those different kind of conversations? And psychological flexibility, I think, is definitely one that has been talked about for a number of years, but I think increasingly this year is going to be more important, right? The year of elections and change. Who knows what's going to be around the corner? So I need to take responsibility from my own self to be prepared for whatever might be around the corner.
Yeah.
It'd be really interesting, actually, those that are listening, a bit of an activity, because I recognize I've been talking for 20 minutes or so. Maybe an activity to think about would be what kind of the self-awareness piece for me was the most difficult of this. Where am I most flexible? What are the scenarios that I'm really flexible in? Where am I not flexible? My better half was telling me the other day, you're the calmest person I've ever met in these scenarios. Yet in these scenarios, you're the least flexible person I've ever met. What is it about these two things? Maybe it's just me, but I'd really like to hear from people that are listening. What is it for you? What are some of those situations that you feel free to be flexible, you feel safe to kind of acknowledge and lean into and step into? And then what are those that you're not? And maybe give us some hints and tips on why not? What is it that's maybe limiting your psychological flexibility? Because I know there are themes, there's lots of research on it, but I'll be really interested to hear some personal anecdotes. I won't put you on the spot, Kerry, and ask you what. that would be really mean. But let's move. Unless you do have one, let's move into kind of what we're starting to see and what we're probably starting to look at recommendations for the next kind of 12, 18 months and beyond. So do you have one, or shall I move into the nervous energy section?
I think that might be a good idea, as I'm feeling a bit nervous about coming up with an example.
It's an apt title, nervous energy. I actually got that from the recent PwC Hopes and Fears survey. I actually really enjoyed it. I thought it summarised things quite well. I was uncertain about some of the depth of some of the principles, which I'll probably do a piece on LinkedIn if you're following me. I'll probably write something about it. But what really stood out for me and why I think it hit the nail on the head was they struck this balance between people kind of struggling financially, feeling like no matter how fast they're running, they're not appreciated by leaders. There's a kind of lack of praise and just generally people are struggling to or feeling like they're running through mud. And then outside of work, they've got a lot of pressure and stress on top of that. I think a recent CIPD survey as well said about half of people are stressed at work. And actually, a lot of those are highly stressed every day. So there's this kind of really weird balance with that. But interestingly, the Hopes and Fears survey came out and said, well, although workload's increased and all of this is going on, people are really energized for wanting to learn more, get stuck into learning more about AI because they think that might be an out to kind of solve a lot of the productivity issues. It's a really interesting blend of nervous energy, I've called it, because you've got this kind of disconnect, excitement on one hand, stress and pressure on the other. What do you make of that?
I think we've talked about unprecedented times when we went through COVID. I think the year that we're having globally in terms of the amount of elections and change that is going on, I can see that constant change does elicit fear in some. But I also think that there are a large percentage of the human nature is a change is always an opportunity or some hope there to see a better outcome. And I think in terms of naturally having to adapt and feeling perhaps change gives you the opportunity to grow and learn, it will always be present rather than just being fearful of things not changing or changing too quickly. So I would say that the nervous energy is correct. It's a you have a kind of unknown. There's not a predictability in the outcome until it actually happens. But what you do know is that whatever the outcome is that there will be change afoot. So it's how prepared you feel. And I think some of the times that comes down to sort of some micro actions or some understanding, coming back to that kind of psychological safety is what's in my control and what's out of my control. And actually that maybe some micro actions within what's in my control can help me feel more grounded or calm about things outside. So let's just, I feel in that sense, if you're looking at becoming, you seek out the opportunities and you get excited about the possibilities to grow in maybe just a small way, knowing that change opportunities will present themselves when a bigger change is happening, and you being mentally prepared for that is is a, it's a good way forward.
Yeah, and it's obviously very tied into your psychological flexibility, right?
Yeah.
And feeling like you have the psychological capital to manage those change scenarios and feel hopeful and optimistic for those, a positive outcome to be waiting for you on the other side of the change. I wondered whether it's maybe a good kind of reflection on, have we been doing the right stuff for the last few years? Kind of the pandemic was a few years ago. Did some of the training and the well-being kind of set us up quite nicely? If people are, despite, I won't use the unprecedented word again, but
It slipped out. Sorry.
but people are going through immense amounts of pressure and change and challenge, and I don't think that's just a UK thing. I'm definitely seeing that in the US. The election results looking quite tight. Actually, there's a lot of uncertainty. I think in Europe even more so. Politically and economically, it's a really interesting time. And yet we're sort of still hopeful that things are good. Or is that just down to human nature and what humans do best? And our companies just getting better at tapping into that human core?
I would say that each of us have a resilience in us. It's just how so let me just put up. It's just how you tune into that and what you do on a daily basis to just keep that topped up. I think if you've got colleagues or people that you work with that are perhaps a little less resilient than you, then being able to talk that through and change some of the troubling queries or challenges that they're having, and giving your outlook and your opinion, if it's a positive spin on things, then that will help promote that kind of safe environment to share, and someone will always have a different opinion, and hopefully that then becomes a positive conversation that you can have, and find ways of, oh, did you read this article, or this was a different opinion that I heard on the radio, and being able to support each other through times of change I think is really positive in the long run, because we as humans connect and communicate in that way. Anything to add with that, Ant?
No, I don't. I'm listening. I'm listening away. I think you're right, and maybe this is an opportunity for organisations to just keep the momentum going. I don't think it's a done thing. I think if we sit back now, we've kind of wasted the last 4 years. I think now's the time to double down on the investment around resilience and psychological flexibility.
Yeah.
Maybe going into that micro level, as you've said, what are the team doing every day, every week? And building belonging and inclusion, so that people feel safe to share their worries and their concerns, so that everyone feels like, okay, well, we're facing the same stuff inside and outside of work, but God, we're great and we're in it together. I think doubling down on that and helping those teams is probably the most important that we've seen in the last, since the pandemic, really.
But I also see, to the earlier point about collaborating well, and that sort of role modeling. If you are able to impart a piece of news that you've heard, or something that you've read, or a podcast you've listened to, which has given you a different perspective, then embracing that, or maybe demonstrating that behavior, helps others around you to see that actually it's not that hard to make those changes. In terms of just health and well-being and exercise, it's those daily habits that you build, and before you know it, 6 weeks has gone by and you are feeling you're feeling lighter about a problem, or feeling fitter about your own well-being. So I think those kind of micro actions, and being able to build those in as daily habits is a really strong way to go about it, and to channel that energy.
And actually relating to your point, there's a question from Gemma around, well, what can we do on a daily basis? What are some of those examples? There's a really great resource, and I know I keep pointing us to different resources that we've done, but because it's so relevant, right? So apologies for the shameless plug, and as well as the useful blog on this conversation that Mike's just put in the chat. Thank you, Mike. There's also a really useful toolkit around how do you use your time and energy really effectively, and how do you plan in through your week. How are you reflecting on what strengths you're using to keep you motivated and feeling optimistic and positive? What positive emotions are you bringing into the team this week? I think those are really helpful little guides, and I know there's a lot out there, but I just wanted to highlight some of those, so maybe we can share some of that afterwards. We've been talking now for a while, and obviously change is at the heart of this. Strengths has been at the heart of it. This kind of human nature to adapt quite well, if you can nurture that, is obviously a bit of a theme for organizations moving forward. I just want to bring us, before we start closing off, into where AI fits into this. And Gen AI obviously is a type of AI. Where does that fit into helping people to do all of these things, or is it going to get in the way? Is there a happy medium somewhere in the middle there?
It's definitely a happy medium. I mean, in terms of Gen AI being able to support you in your role in perhaps getting the structure of a task that you're putting together. And I know I do this when I'm looking at answering emails or proposals. How can I reword that? Where can I take that information from and succinctly package it up into some bullet points? I mean, in terms of using AI, that can help speed up that thought process. But I also think that you are still the curator of the message that you're putting out. I still think that in terms of understanding how it will benefit us, we will still need to wrap our thinking around it, prioritize the messages that we want to put out. I'm thinking about solving workplace problems or bringing AI into procedures. I think it's a helpful tool, but it should be seen as that way, rather than a replacement for your intuition, your thinking. That's where I am at present. Yeah,
you're so right. It should be a tool that you're conscious of using in the right ways at the right time, but it shouldn't replace the natural skills as leaders, as teams. I used a good analogy. Well, I think it's a good analogy. I liked it, so I thought I'd share it on a call recently, where I was saying, we've got spelling check, right? We've got spell check. That doesn't make me a better speller, right? And I think using AI to cover up some of these human, AI can coach, it can check up on people. There's lots of well-being apps right now. There's a lot of things and I wrote a piece recently about middle management is dead, because actually AI could do all of those things that middle managers do. And what I wasn't saying is that management is dead, because actually what they're going to be doing is more of the leadership skills. So how are we helping people who traditionally have kind of centered their work around kind of management, checking up on people, making sure they're all right? How can we lean into AI to do all of those things? Because it is ultimately more cost effective for organizations. But then how are organizations reskilling people in the leadership skills to make sure that then the AI is being used and used appropriately, and also the information that's gathered from the AI around how people are doing? What changes are going to happen as a result of that? How we get leaders to facilitate change and communicate change once you've kind of got all of that data coming through. I think it's a really interesting mix of how AI is going to be helping us be more human going forward.
Yeah.
Yes, and stop talking. One other point that I wanted to touch on there, and I don't know if this came up in previous kind of conversations, but I know kind of L&D are really looking at AI in terms of curating human-centered design. You know, how can we make learning a little bit more human, which is ironic because you're using AI, but basically, how can you make it in your hands at the time that you need it, based on your personal as well as your professional motivations? You know, how are we kind of serving people up certain types of learning through a marketplace? Also, how are we getting people onto projects to, as you quite rightly pointed out right at the beginning, how are we giving people these opportunities to play to their strengths? There's an awful lot there from an L&D perspective around AI that's going to be quite interesting to look at in the next 12 months.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, how we use that data, and there's always been a great conversation from talking with L&D professionals, is that how do you make the evaluation and you know, the data that you gather inform, and it's not just ROI, it's, you know, how does it inform your next move? How does it anticipate what your next challenge may well be in your workforce? How do you move them from competency based to skills based? You know, how do you use that data to be able to strategize and deliver a new workforce of the future? I think in terms of AI, you can't forget about people's strengths and skills, and perhaps although you can probably challenge and develop chatbots to be more intuitive and maybe empathetic, it's not going to be able to prioritize and understand exactly you as a human, because we're all individuals. How you then layer that in, I think from probably the L&D space, the AI kind of build is really on the tools that you're using in order to get the content ready, but you still as a professional in that space need to then work out exactly how that's going to meet your learning objectives and make sure that actually the order at which you're scaffolding that learning is correct. It's not just ordered in a priority rating. You know, you have to understand how you're unpacking that learning and then building up each outcome. So you've got a well-rounded program, and that's where I think the human aspect will never go away. It's always going to be needed to give that overall well-rounded what it is to be human.
Yeah. And it's interesting actually, because we've launched a couple of kind of, I guess, packages that are a little bit more, okay, you know the stuff, let's really challenge that thinking. You know what authenticity is, but let's do the human thing of challenging it, debating it, throwing it around. Does it work for this organization? Why not? And it's been really interesting to see that, you know, AI might be great for knowledge building. Is it going to be great for skill development over time? I don't think so. I think that is more of a, as exactly as you've just said, a bit of a human to human type skill to be developed. I think it can be then enhanced, and obviously there's some self-awareness, maybe a better pre-work and things like that that obviously, you know, every learning organization out there is looking at. But I think the core of it, can a human being look at another human being and have a difficult conversation? You know, those are the skills that how can you do that without being there in the room with people, with other leaders who have been through the same thing? It's a human skill thing.
Yeah, that human connection, building a community, being able to share, coming straight back to where we started, really almost in full circle, about how you as a team are motivated to learn from each other, to celebrate your achievements, to give feedback on things that went well and didn't, and support each other through change, because you know that I think that will always be at the center of what we talk about here, but also a driver for us as humans.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess that is a bit of a full circle. Look, it's almost like we've planned it. Look, and I can't believe that 45 minutes has gone that quick. And I say that every single time. I guess if I'm an organization and I'm going, what are the one or two things that I need to take away from this conversation? I'll kind of let you think about that, but I'll kind of give my spin on this. I think there's a couple of really important things. Number one is doubling down on the investment that has been kind of made over the last few years, and especially around that psychological flexibility, leaning into strengths and not putting the onus on the manager. I think that comes into a lot of what people are talking about with improving their employer value proposition. People often forget that Bailey and French also has a recruitment part to the business, right? And we often get the question of, well, this is why I want to move to this organization because of X, Y, Z. And I think everything that we've spoken about with an organization that taps into that human nature of playing to strengths, supporting each other, having that better culture, and not leaning too heavily on AI while they do it, I think is a really important one for the employee value proposition. I think the second part of that, and I've got my notes here from earlier, is around that navigating the nervous energy. I think if we can tap into that and leverage it, a lot of people are talking about continuous learning cultures and innovation cultures, even creating little micro cultures to spark an idea and run with it. I think that leveraging the engagement for people wanting to learn more and wanting to engage in an organization's performance, almost that's giving them purpose at the moment because things are so stressful elsewhere. As long as that's not tipped too far in terms of pushing performance at the expense of well-being, I think that could be a really nice way for an organization to create a bit of energy and spark back into people's lives. What do you reckon? What's your two?
I think you wrapped it up very nicely there, Anne. Yeah, it's been an enjoyable conversation actually to talk through this. I agree. Yeah. I'm
Well,
the optimist.
we can leave it there. And I also just wanted, if we're wrapping up there, thank you everyone that's been watching this, by the way, and thank you for those that have put comments in, those that I've missed, or it can sometimes be difficult to have a look. So I will make sure that I respond to you if I see some questions come in. Please do check out those resources. And Mike, there was a link that popped up that we took away. The little QR code, if you've got that, it is in the comments as well. That's a really helpful summary, I think, of what we've been talking about today, because I know sometimes my conversations can go all over the place. A huge shout out to Mike. He is about there. If you give a wave, it's sometimes, it's nice to say thank you to the people that are squirreling away in the background with all of the tech. So thank you, Mike, as always, for your support. Kerry, great conversation, and there will be more to come. I'm sure we'll have to do another review at some point. Were we correct in all of our predictions? Who knows?
Well, I've enjoyed my first live, so thank you.
Thanks for joining. Join us, by the way. So we're doing these every month. The next one's probably going to be around AI, so tune into that, because I think there's a lot more that we could have touched on today, but we did choose not to on purpose. So do tune into that. It will be at the end of July, and of course there's a few big changes that happen in July all around the world, but especially in the UK. So that's going to be a really interesting one to consider at that time. But thank you to all of our global audience as well. I can see a few from all around the world. So thank you and welcome. It's great to have you as part of the Bailey and French community. We will see you next month.